Yeah, in China, it's a communist government. So they would say that the fact that a person is rich doesn't give him the right to employ everyone else and turn them into employees and effective wage slaves.
Unfortunately, there's too much of that going on. I mean, in China. So, I mean, there is the philosophy and the reality dichotomy that one has to be sensitive to. I mean, they are working. I mean, admittedly, at shops that produce sneakers for Nike. So ultimately, the international or multinational corporations get involved. But on the local level, you really do have. Well, there's a saying in China: some must get rich first. so there is that. I mean, there is sort of pernicious capitalism in China as well. I mean, there are problems, but the it's not all bad, and it's not as though they don't have hugely difficult challenges that they're addressing. So, well, I don't think China is. I think China is far from perfect. It's a mixed bag, and just like we are here, we don't do everything right. We do some things right, and we have the advantage of being in a more developed country. But the peasants, really, I think you could say their conditions have improved over the last couple decades significantly. So they've got some ways to go. There are civil rights issues that I think are real, but we have our own problems too.
I was a student in the Soviet Union in the late 80s while Gorbachev was the president, and we were told that we could walk anywhere in Moscow and feel completely safe. I didn't see any poverty there or any crime. But of course we know now that they have capitalism. There's a tremendous amount of crime and poverty. So the people there now don't have the human right to be safe in the street, and they also don't have the right to. There used to be the right there to housing. If you didn't have housing, you would get it for free, and the food was free. That's another thing in China, for instance. They talk so much about the low incomes, but what does that income buy? Did you see any poverty when you were in Peking?
Well, yes. I mean, depends on what you mean by poverty. I mean, they certainly weren't. I mean, there was some people. Some people are living in luxurious situations, and some people are living in more rundown places. But they're doing a lot of building. I mean, they're moving people. I think as sort of efficiently as one can expect from, dirt floor buildings to modest apartments. I mean, I don't think you can say. I don't think you can say there isn't poverty, and there are problems with migrant workers. But I think when you mentioned crime, the crime rate is much lower than it is here. It's true that they execute people. So again, there are problems in China. but
when Bush was governor of Texas, I think he executed 120 people.
Yeah. Right. So
so China's not unique in executing people.
No, we're on a relatively short, shortening list of countries that still do that.
Living in a house with a dirt floor, that sounds pretty bad. But on the other hand, let's just think about what we have here in Burlington. It wasn't a year or two ago, we heard about a homeless camp out behind Hannaford where the people were living in a little island in the swamp
Yeah.
in tents, and there was a murder out there, but people still live like that right here in Burlington. And so if we want to talk about poverty, a dirt floor doesn't seem so bad if you're living in a swamp in a tent.
Yeah, it actually didn't look so bad, actually. I mean, I hate to say that in a way. I mean, it didn't, I mean, poverty is in some ways relative. And it didn't seem like the people that I saw were, I hate to say this, suffering. I don't have access to the degree to which they were suffering, so I don't know.
Well, let's get back to 9/11. The two Trade Center buildings, on TV we could see the little puffs of smoke coming out. It looked as if there were explosives in there. And of course, that would explain the controlled demolition idea that they came down at free fall speed if you blew out the columns on the bottom. But then the 9/11 Commission's report says, well, they were hit by the airplane, and the airplane destabilized the top floors, and they pancaked. So some people would believe that. But how about Building 7? Have you looked into the question of Building 7? Now, that came down just like the other buildings, but it wasn't hit by an airplane.
Right. Well, it came down a little bit differently. It came down fast. In fact, it came down closer to free fall speed. And it did come down starting from the bottom rather than starting from the top. Leading an expert in controlled demolitions in Europe, the proprietor, I believe the largest controlled demolition company, when he saw the film of that collapse, to say, this is a controlled demolition. Absolutely sure. But yes, it came down very, very quickly, symmetrically. I mean, to watch this on film, I mean, you can't watch it and not say, you know, what's going on here? And I think that's one of the reasons it wasn't hardly ever shown. It was shown on that night on TV, and it wasn't shown again for at least 5 years. In contrast to the Twin Towers, which were shown over and over and over again.
When you watch Building 7 come down, you can see it coming down directly in its footprint, symmetrically, but you can also see that the roof, the center of the roof starts to come in first.
Right.
And this is part of the controlled demolition. They bring the center in, they blow it up first so that the building won't tip over and hurt other buildings on the side.
Right. And this, you know, it goes to the question of the investigation too. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is the government organization tasked with explaining the collapses of these buildings. And they just came out with the final report in 2008 for Building 7. And at first they came out with the draft for, you know, public review or something, in which they claimed that the collapse was 40% slower than free fall, which seems like, okay, 40% slower than free fall, so maybe that's possible. But it took a high school physics teacher to make them back down, and by essentially proving how easy it was to show that for the first, well, not quite the first, but for a period of time near the beginning, for almost 2.5 seconds, it fell at free fall speed.